Perfect. Okay, I believe we're good to go. I'll start by introducing myself. Hi, I'm Rhea, and the, the bubble next to me that doesn't have a face at the moment is Emily.
Hello everyone, I'm Emily, and I am a bubble today because I'm having a bit of a setback with my health, which we can talk about in more detail, can't we? It's very relevant to today, Rhea. So
Absolutely. So today, as you all know, we do monthly webinars. So the theme of this particular month is that it is Dysautonomia Awareness Month. It is also Mental Health Awareness Month, as well as ADHD Awareness Month. And we thought that it would be good to kind of talk about what each of those things are. And for those of you watching, you will know what they are, but more how often they kind of maybe co-occur. And then talk about the reality of living with these conditions in whatever way may be relevant. So we'll talk a little bit about our experiences today. And if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to pop up and put them in the chat. And you're welcome to get in touch if you are watching the recording later on. Okay. So I think when preparing for this webinar, we kind of decided and opted out of creating a presentation because when it comes to awareness months, it is more about raising awareness rather than, say, education on specifically the conditions. Because if you're watching this, you kind of pretty much know what dysautonomia is, or you might have an inkling. But I think we wanted to highlight that dysautonomia is an umbrella term, and it means different things to different people, as well as very much individualized to the person and their lived experience as well. So, Em, I always refer to you as the expert because you're literally doing your PhD in this area. But what would you define dysautonomia as the umbrella term to be?
I'm flattered, Rhea. Um, so I always look to the name because the name is really telling us what's going on with that. So dysautonomia itself, if you break it down, it's saying dysfunction of the automatic system. So with these conditions, what we're seeing is that things in our system that should be functioning on their own, they're not working as effectively as they should be. And as you mentioned, like we're all unique with our presentations of this as well. So it might be that, one system is affected a bit more than another in one person versus the other. So yeah, keeping in mind that variable presentation is always important to be aware of.
Absolutely. So I suppose like the common labels behind this is things like postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is one that we might hear often, or POTS. Other labels we'll hear is maybe orthostatic intolerance or orthostatic hypotension. There is inappropriate sinus tachycardia, or others labeled as neurocardiogenic syncope or vasovagal syncope.
Yeah.
Am I missing any?
No, you've done a really
Probably
good job,
multiple.
Raya.
There's so many little acronyms and variations, and within each variation is very much just somewhat indicative of the symptom presentation there. So when we're saying POTS, we are looking for a hallmark criteria being the tachycardia that's in that label, versus orthostatic intolerance is sometimes a different term we'll go to, especially when someone doesn't have the tachycardia side of things, but they have the postural blood pressure drops or whatever it might be. So as Em said, like everyone's lived experience is different, as well as the label you have been given or suspected will indicate what your symptom profile might look like within that.
Yeah. And I think as well that can vary too, depending on which clinician you see, which cardiologist, electrophysiologist, pharmacologist, whatever it is, because they're interpreting those results and providing the label, and they'll always have a reason as to why. So,
I think that's a really great point. And it's one that we maybe don't highlight to people as much, is that there are certain clinicians that specialize more in one area than another, and they'll more likely go to this particular terminology or that terminology based on where, what country you're in or what that person specializes in. And it's where I think a lot of people can get confused when we use terms interchangeably as well. That's confusing and exhausting.
yeah, absolutely.
So I think if we talk about why we wanted to encompass everything together, it's Dysautonomia, Mental Health, and ADHD Awareness Month. And I think each of those could be very long webinars, each and of their own, if we were to dive into the pathophys and into the symptoms and the triggers and the management and lived experience of each of those. So kind of wanted to keep it as light as we could today. But Em, in your experience, how often do you see those three co-occurring?
Oh, so commonly, Rhea, every day. And even for those who might not have those official diagnoses, you know, they may present in that way or share that they have their suspicions that these things are present as well, which is always important, you know, to listen to the person and what they're describing,
Mm,
regardless of those labels. So,
yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's I think one of the biggest, most important things there that you said, my, from my opinion anyway,
Mm,
is, it is important to look at what that person is most challenged with and what kind of help they need around that, because it's not about someone else's judgment to go, oh, you've got this diagnosis, therefore that is encompassing all of your symptom profile,
mm.
or you've got that, so therefore you have to normalize this. I think it's really important to look at the whole person of someone and their entire being and the presence of not only what diagnoses they may or may not have and what symptoms they may or may not have, but really relating to their internal experience and what is important for them for people to understand or for them for people to accommodate around, and what help or guidance they may need to.
Yeah, I think we sound like broken records, Raya, but I don't care when we talk about the whole person because it is, you know, it's looking at the individual rather than just at those labels.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is a central point for us as a clinic is providing belief and validation. And that it sounds like in my personal opinion, I really don't think that we should it's very important, but we people should be receiving that. That should be a given. That should be part of the process.
Mm,
And in this population, it's not. They're gaslit, they're second guessed. They don't have that belief or empathy, and they don't really have that validation behind their diagnoses or their experience. And that's something that we ourselves try and provide because we know that others aren't doing so and people aren't receiving it. And you'd think that in healthcare that would be a given, that you receive belief and validation behind your experience. And it's just not the case. And that's why you said we can sound like broken records. And I think that's wonderful, in that
mm.
whole person, because you are not your diagnosis, you are not your symptoms and your lived experience. You are an entire person, and that existence within that will change day to day and week to week and period of life and where you are and what's going on for you. And what we focus on where we really need to start is belief and validity and compassion and empathy behind what it is that's going on for you.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better myself, Raya. And it is confronting though, isn't it, when you go into those sessions and people are like, "Oh, you won't believe like what happened the other day at the doctor's." And I'm like, I wish I
Mm,
could say, yeah, I can't believe that, but unfortunately I'm hearing that almost on a daily basis
yeah.
from people. And
Yeah.
that is really hard, and it's nice to be able to provide these people with a level of support where they don't have to keep going back to those experiences, or you can shed some light on things that they're going through as well for them. So that's always lovely to do.
Yeah. And I think it is, I know when I was first diagnosed many, many years ago, when I uttered chronic fatigue syndrome, nobody knew what it was, and they're like,
Mm.
"Oh, I've never heard of it before." I am grateful that now a lot more people at least know the term. Less people know what it is, but I do believe we're growing in awareness, and I do believe things like our awareness months and raising awareness and talking to people about it. And I think social media, from that perspective, can be a wonderful thing of accessibility. I do believe we're getting somewhere. It's not where it should be or where it needs to be, but in my experience in just the last 17 years, it has changed over time, and it bloody well
Mm.
should.
Yeah.
um, but I think that's something that we can lean on is, now more people know more people, and it's not about it being rare or unknown. It's just about finding your right supports and your right people.
Yeah. And especially, I feel in the last 5 years, there has been a really big change in the way that we are perceiving this and
Yep.
the awareness around it. And where that goes, hopefully, in positive directions and helping us get some answers for things. But
Yeah.
there's still a lot that we don't know about these conditions.
Yep, way too much. And I agree with you, Em. I think I often say that there's a few positive things that came out of the pandemic, and then I do understand how much of a challenging time that was, and the fact that it
Mm,
was a pandemic. But I think the world became a little bit more accessible for those living with an invisible illness. Telehealth is now offered as a general service rather than a exception. And things like understanding that people don't recover from viruses, and we now know long COVID, and I think chronic fatigue is now a little bit better known, or dysautonomia is a bit better known because of its connection to long COVID. That I think there is a little bit more of a light shining in the invisible illness space than there was pre-pandemic.
yeah, absolutely. And even if we can't fully understand 100% of the physiology of these conditions, it doesn't mean that we can't respect them and continue to learn.
Yes, definitely. So circling back to our earlier sort of co-occurring, I think it's quite understandable to connect invisible illness and mental health challenges. I think when you have an invisible illness that influences your entire existence and your entire life, that subsequently is going to have an impact on mental health for some, and not all. But I often like to talk about that they will. I say they kind of complement each other, which is kind of what we don't want, but it works really well.
Mm,
Which means that we do have fluctuating mental health issues. And I know for myself personally, I never used to recognize that in me. And I always used to go, no, no, I'm not here to talk about my mental health. I'm here to talk to you about
mm,
my physical health. I'm here to talk about my chronic fatigue. So I think it's really important to go. These will often go hand in hand. And it's not to say you have an invisible illness because of your mental health, or that you have mental health issues because of your invisible illness, although for some that absolutely can be the case. But understanding that, again, we're a whole person and an entire being, that we are going to have fluctuating health status, physically, emotionally, cognitively, and all of those concepts. And it's not, it is about creating safety around talking about our mental health, because it will have challenges connected to our invisible illnesses as well.
yeah, and you're right. I think safety around those topics is the key thing, especially, and you can probably relate to this as well, Raya, but someone living with the conditions, and also from all the people that we speak to, there is a lot of oh, you don't have POTS, like you have anxiety. And
Mm.
the one that I love, oh, you're anxious about standing up. Anyway, I won't go down that tangent, but the
Yeah.
bottom line there is it's so understandable that if people have had these challenging experiences, that the last
Mhm.
thing they want to do is talk about their mental health, because they're going to feel very vulnerable to
Mhm.
open themselves up to potentially get shut down for it just being mental health, when
Yep.
really it's a multifaceted
Mhm.
situation that is very, very complex. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such an important point to raise. And I think that does circle back to making sure we have the right people in our team that take us
mm,
seriously and understand the difference between anxiety and POTS, and that they can co occur, but we still have very strong physiological issues with standing, that we're not
mm.
anxious about standing, and that the symptom profile will have parallels. But yeah, there's a good video we have on our YouTube about understanding anxiety within dysautonomia, that could be a good reference point.
Mm.
So to connect dysautonomia and ADHD, specifically, I'd probably say let's just put that umbrella of neurodivergence rather than ADHD specifically. But
Yeah.
and would you say that it's quite common for dysautonomia and neurodivergence to overlap?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're doing more and more research into this rare, as you know, and it's kind of that trifecta where we've got dysautonomia. If we're dysautonomic, we are more likely to be hypermobile. If we're hypermobile, we're more likely to be neurodivergent. And we have this lovely triangle that is created. So it doesn't mean that everybody will fit all of those categories or multiple categories, but we know now from that emerging literature that these things are very interconnected.
Mm. I think that's a wonderful point because we don't often know that they're connected. So I think some people feel unlucky that they have multiple health challenges and multiple diagnoses.
Mm,
Um, and we're also just, I often have this conversation of we're really just not educated on our bodies and our health, and
mm,
specifically something like hypermobility. It's so often that we will point out hypermobility in our patients and they themselves have never thought of it, or never noticed that their joint subluxes or hyperextends a little bit, or they are a bit bendy, or they've had some party tricks, whatever it might be. I find it's quite common. You'd think you'd kind of work forwards and go, okay, well, we have neurodivergence and then we have hypermobility and then we have dysautonomia. But often it's
mm,
we have dysautonomia, and in further exploration, I think part of that is because you're hypermobile, and then I think part of that is you have a neurodivergent brain.
mm.
And understanding that they do co-occur quite frequently, it isn't about luck. It's actually about kind of genetics and pathophys.
Yeah, and I know in practice for me as well, right? I see a lot of people who won't consider themselves hypermobile unless they're quite on the extreme end of being
Yes.
hypermobile.
Yep.
But we know that there can be mild presentations of hypermobility and even like spot hypermobility as well. So your traditional testing, like your Baton score, might not actually be picking up all of the joints that are
Yep.
hypermobile in an individual. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I was looking at recent data where it said one in 8 people are hypermobile, but even within that, it said that that's likely incorrect because it's underreported and
mm,
under-recognized slash known about. So it could be like 1 in 8 is still quite a lot of people, and
yeah,
it could be way more than that too. And as you said, it could be localized to specific joints rather than generalized hypermobility.
yeah, yeah.
So it's way more common than we think it is.
Definitely. And still so much that we need to learn about it as well, Real.
Yeah, there always will be. We
The
learn and
story
then
of
we
my
go,
life. I talk about
yeah.
this all the time. Ray's like,
And
don't start.
I know it because it's, that's saying we don't know what we don't know, and then we start to learn a little bit more. So we know this, but we now know that we don't know that, and then we don't
Yeah,
know this, but we know that we now know that. It's just, it's going to be an ongoing um, piece of research always.
yeah. And I'll keep doing that research, so don't worry.
I know you will. So I did flex for you before you are doing your PhD in this space, and I think that's something that should be more widely known because you are an absolute, I say this in the best way possible, you're an absolute nerd in this space, and it's incredible. So is there anything that you have loved to have learnt about within your exploration of doing your PhD?
And it's always lovely to hear that, Raya. I feel so flattered. That's a great question. I'm just sitting here and I'm like, how do you break down an
I
entire
did put you on the
thesis?
spot.
Yeah, to like summarize stuff. I think as a clinician, just hearing more perspectives from people and learning about some of the challenges that are out there. Because as a clinician, we don't necessarily say, oh, what challenges have you faced in healthcare or accessing things, because they're accessing that in our sessions, Raya. So
Hmm.
for me, it's sort of like, let's just fill your toolkit and keep going from there.
Hmm.
But just realizing, how few resources people might actually have, or that awareness. Like you were saying, if they have neurodivergence or they have POTS, they have challenges with their mental health, it's not always clear where they can go to get support on that. And they might end up on, wait lists for ages trying to get care.
Yep.
Because essentially that's what my research is on, is it's looking at how can people get access to care sooner
Hmm.
so that they've got something while they're waiting to see clinicians.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, just making sure that that stuff is accessible to people so that they know about things like POTS Dysautonomia International, the Australian POTS Foundation, and that they're accessing those sorts of resources,
Mm.
and that those places are putting up as much stuff as possible. And even us, right? Like you don't need to be a charity to be providing these resources to
Mm.
people as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful point. And I know I'm not sure how recent this has been, but it can take on average up to 6 years to get a diagnosis of POTS.
Mm,
And that's an incredibly long period of time.
Yeah.
And they're kind of scary symptoms to be dealing with when you don't know what's going on in your body and why your heart rate is skyrocketing. And you know, some have been concerned of a looming heart attack because of what their heart is doing and feeling. And I think
Mm.
that's really scary and isolating to be within, to be waiting so long for a diagnosis.
Yeah, and I can relate to that as well, Raya. And I always reassure people that if they have gone to the A&E for support with things like chest pain, like that was the appropriate thing to do because you didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And, you know, early on in my health journey, I did that at least twice because I was like, these all feel like symptoms of, you know,
Yeah.
some very serious issues.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and now having that education, it's it's a lot easier for me from like a mental health perspective and a
Mhm.
management perspective. But if you don't know what's going on,
No.
then yeah.
Yeah. No. And I think that validation is really important because it's scary, it's overwhelming, and it's not until we understand more and we have people around us to create safety in that,
Mm,
that helps us then look at what tools we can have in our toolkit.
yeah, absolutely. But it's difficult when you don't have access to that information to know, even like with setback management, like how do you minimize that? How do you bounce
Yeah.
back as fast as possible to your baseline?
Yeah, definitely. So I suppose with that in mind, if you don't mind sharing, what do flare-ups and bad days look like for you, and what are your management strategies?
Oh, where to start? Where to start? So today is a great example of like a moderate sort of setback for me, where I was saying to you earlier, Raya, I knew that if I didn't take the time out today to rest and have space for myself, that I knew that would turn into a much bigger setback that would take a lot longer to manage. Um, so when my POTS and my fatigue symptoms flare up, I really look at cutting back to the bare minimum for me so that I can have that space. And it's tricky to describe because I could sit here and describe everything that I do, Raya, but the
Yeah.
reality is that it looks a bit different for everyone, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great point, is that it's giving yourself permission to address what you need. It's going to
Yeah.
change from flare up to flare up and trigger to trigger.
Mm,
You know, sometimes it can be activity related or postural related, and other times it can be weather related or stress related. And
yeah.
the management strategies are going to vary quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it's the thing I want to highlight in what you said is giving yourself permission to get to the bare basics of what it is that you need to do for the day or the week or whatever it might be, is to go, instead of pushing through, instead of not
Mm,
listening to the body and it escalating further, it's about meeting your body with what it needs at this point in time and looking at what strategies can I utilize based on where I'm at today. Because it could be more horizontal time, it could be more electrolytes, it could be handing something off to someone else to do an action, and so many other variations of what tools are in our toolkit. But I
mm.
think on that is making sure we have tools in our toolkit, and you may not
Yeah.
have all of them. You might not know of half of them. That's also okay, and this is why we have why we are the clinic that we are, or why there are so many resources online, is it's actually learning what tools should be in your belt and in your toolkit so that you have some things to reference on those bad days.
Yeah, and some is better than none when it comes to strategies. And I always say this to people, like, we're not perfect. We're not going to be able to put in every strategy every single time, but any strategies that we can implement are going to help us to be
Yeah.
better than if we didn't have anything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, compromise can play a really big role in that. As I
Yeah.
messaged you this morning, Raya, I was like, I'm not working today, but I will lie down and chat to you for the webinar so
Yeah.
that you weren't lonely.
I appreciate that. Um, Yeah, and
um,
ultimately it is like, I know I said, I'm like, hey, if you don't want to do the webinar, I'll do it on my own.
yeah.
And it's about choosing what you feel is worth the compromise or the energy or whatever it might be. And I think part of that is not being judgmental about
Mm,
doing this and not doing that, or the inability to be able to do that, even though you plan to, is like, just be kind to yourself, be compassionate about it. Like the flare up is hard enough in of itself, let alone the way that we can feel about ourselves on top of it too.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking as you're talking as well, Rhea, about some of the general dysautonomic setback management strategies. And they're really like our normal strategies, but sometimes we put them into overdrive. So like you were saying, we might spend more time in a reclined position, we might have more fluid, more electrolytes than we might normally have. We might wear tighter compressions. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that we might see a little bit more of on those days. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is where it comes back to, is like, I truly believe that living an invisible illness is slowly just collecting tools for the toolkit over time, so that you have as many as accessible to that person and to that place and to that trigger, so that it feels like we can influence as much as we can whilst living in a body with a chronic illness.
yeah, absolutely, Rhea. Absolutely.
So I'm conscious of time. Is there any last wise words of wisdom?
I wish I had the brain for it today, Rhea. I think if I could tell myself anything right now, it's exactly what you said, is having that self-compassion and understanding and knowing that we are doing the best that we can in a challenging situation is really the thing that
Yeah.
I think it applies to setbacks and just management in general with living with these conditions.
Yeah. And I honestly think that's a big part of what my job as a clinician is that validation to be like, no, no, you know what you're doing. Just be kinder to yourself that you need to do it, and
Mm,
give yourself permission to stabilize rather than focusing on progression or whatever it might be. It's like, just be kind to yourself. You're up against enough.
mm.
And sometimes we do have that challenging headspace, and I totally want to recognize that. But often I'm just reminding people to maybe be a bit more gentle and speak to themselves the way that they would someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's okay to have those challenging thoughts as well, where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
everything feels really crappy today. And
Yeah.
but it's focusing as well on the things that you can do to manage that while also, you know, being able to vent or whatever, because that's part
Yeah.
of that grief process and that management process as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize and create safety around that.
Mm,
Mm.
definitely.
Okay. So knowing that today's not the best day, and I know many people can resonate with that. I think our wise words of wisdom is be kind to yourself, give yourself space, and take it one day at a time.
Sounds like a perfect summary, Rhea.
Perfect. All right. Well, we will wrap it up there. If there's any questions from today, do feel free to get in contact, and we have lots of resources on our social media and website and all of that fun stuff. But for now, we'll sign off, and I often like to say that we're sending love and spoons your way. I know that's not literal, but I like to say it nonetheless. Cool. All right, take care, everyone, and thanks, Em.
No worries. Bye, everyone.
Bye.